This is Ona Lee with Clara's Canning, and today we're teaching a canning class. Cooking and canning with my grandma Clara at her little house in Rural City are some of the best memories I have. And now, I'm on a mission to preserve local food systems and traditions. By combining my lifetime of professional culinary and farming experience with generations of knowledge to bring you a fountain of skills and recipes to sustain and pass down. We're getting to the very bottom of food from the ground up, so I hope you'll join us. First things first, on the front of your booklet, it has a little disclaimer, and the disclaimer is, canning and fermenting is at your own risk. When proper procedures are followed, there's little to no risk. When done improperly, canning can be deadly. Chef Ona Lee, me, will have thoroughly run down all risks and proper procedures to prevent injury. By taking this class, you have assumed all risks. So if you go home and you don't listen to me and you get yourself hurt, not my problem. Do not fear home canning, but always follow the rules. And I will say this, I see terrible procedure on the internet all the time. Really, truly, I would say, and I make canning videos that go on the internet, so I'm telling you not to go to the internet for canning, but I mean, there are some people for sure doing the right thing. I really, truly go by the book, whether it's this or the National Food Preservation standards or the USDA standards, but use a book. There are procedures that cannot be altered, and then there's other things that can be altered, and we'll go into that. But for real, especially while you're learning or getting really used to it, or, I will still open this book and I will be reading along with you guys this entire time. So that is super important. All right. We are making Grandma's dill pickles. This is by far my favorite cucumber pickle recipe. And there are some things that I've edited, but they're not procedural. They're flavoring wise. I don't like pickling spice all that much because it's a mix, and depending on what brand of pickling spice you're buying, it could be a bunch of different things. Some are really heavy on cinnamon and some are not, so I don't do that. I add a teaspoon of black pepper. I use dill seed, and we'll get into all the edits here. I also am gonna add a grape leaf, but these are all flavorings. We're not changing the dilution of the vinegar, we're not changing the headspace, we're not changing the processing time, we're not changing the sanitary procedures. So there are things you can do to your liking. If you like something spicy, for sure you can add some chili flake, you can add a slice of chili pepper, that doesn't matter. But things like headspace, the vinegar dilution is extremely important. You don't ever want to buy or use vinegar for canning that is not 5% acidity. That's because if you add water to a different acidity vinegar, then your dilution is no longer in the safe range. So, and I actually really prefer to use this Four Monks white wine vinegar versus a white distilled because I think it tastes a little bit better. But always just make sure that it's 5%, okay? So first things first, we have some garlic on our station. Also, this recipe says 1 clove of garlic per jar. I don't think so. That's not enough. So everybody has some garlic here, and do what you're comfortable with. If you're only comfortable to peel this garlic by hand like that, go ahead and peel it that way. If you're comfortable enough, you can do a quick couple taps, kind of break it open, and then peel it that way. Whichever you like.
Oh my gosh.
Wow. It's good that happened because now we can talk about it. I'm not going to use this because it was potentially compromised when that happened. We don't know. I don't see any cracks. I don't see anything visible, but checking your jars and making sure that they're not compromised in any way, but they are tempered glass. Like, you don't want to subject jars that you're using for canning to quick temperature changes, hot and cold, dropping, chipping, anything like that. This is a 2-day recipe, so we're jumping into day 2 because I have done the day 1 prep for you because that wouldn't be possible to do in one class. And I'm gonna bring the cucumbers out in just a minute and we'll talk about the day 1 procedure, but it's super simple. Don't really need to see that to understand, and we'll talk about it anyway. So, okay, so these are jar tongs. These are like the old school kind. I don't love these, but they're cheap and they're accessible. If you can find some with hinges, these are my favorite. So you're gonna go ahead and grab that, and then you and I are gonna walk up to the pot together. So, it's super important when you're dropping a jar that you put it in at an angle as much as possible. If you put a jar straight down into the water, it can create a bubble that will burn you. So go ahead and give that a go. And sometimes near the end when the canner is full, there's not as much space to tip it, so just be really careful when you're lowering it in. So for jars to be sterile, they have to be boiled for at least 10 minutes. And it's good to put a timer on, but I just put them in as I'm prepping everything else, and I know for sure they've been down for 10 minutes, but dishwashers are not jar sterilizers. There's no other real way to do it. I mean, some people do it in the oven and da-da-da, that kind of all freaks me out. The only actual recommended way to do it is boiling water 10 minutes. And before we sterilize these, even though they were brand new in the case, we did run them through the dishwasher. You can hand wash or you can do that part in the dishwasher. Washing before sterilizing is important. The difference between sanitize and sterilize is sanitize means most organisms have been killed. Sterilize means absolutely all have been killed. Okay, next part. I am going to measure our ingredients for the brine, and I'm not gonna turn the burner on yet. I just wanna have that out of the way when we get our cucumbers. And I did this before you guys got here, but this is a pot of the lids, just the flats. The rings never make contact with any food, so the rings do not have to be sterilized because they're going in the boiling water in the process. So they will at some point be sterilized later on. But the flat part of the lid and the jar are the only thing that make food contact. And I'm gonna add a little splash.
Sterilize the flat part?
So we're gonna simmer them. We're not gonna do a full hard rolling boil because the gum on these, you don't want to do that. I do a little splash of vinegar, especially if you live on a well and you have hard water. Hard water can build up on jars and lids, and it's not necessarily a problem. It's not going to affect your canning in any negative way. It just feels weird. It feels kind of fuzzy, like if your shower has scuzz build up on it. The vinegar will break down those minerals and make it so that can't happen. So if you do have hard water, add about 2 tablespoons. Yeah.
Oh, you can finish with yours.
No, you can go ahead.
Can you reuse the flats? Or
Never.
Never.
No.
Okay.
The flats can be reused for if you're freezing food, if you're keeping food like leftovers or something in your fridge, or for dry storage, but for shelf-stable canning, lids are single use.
But the
Always.
jars can be reused.
Jars and the rings.
Jars and rings. Okay.
But the flat part has to be new every time.
Oh.
Yeah. So if you have hard water, go ahead and add about 2 tablespoons of vinegar to your canning pot as well. And that will prevent that kind of scuzzy buildup on your jars. Okay. This is not.
That looks like what I got at home.
This is called a rondeau. This is not for making brine, but it is one of the only stainless steel pots in this kitchen besides my canning pots, and you really don't want to make brine in aluminum or high reactive pots like enameled cast iron or aluminum or Teflon coated or anything like that. Stainless steel for canning all the way around is your safest bet. There are, I know the really classic canning pot is those like black with white fleckled dots, like ceramic coated pot. I don't love those. I don't hate them. I think they make a great foot bath, but I don't know what's in the enamel coating necessarily. I know they're made in the USA, so it's got to have some regulation, but if they dent at all, which is really easy because they're super thin, that coating chips, and I don't know what that metal is behind that. So the stainless steel pot right there with a clear glass lid, that is a specific canning pot. But when I take the rack out, it's also just a pot in my kitchen, and it saves a lot of space because I don't have these like single-use pots. The other pot over there is a stock pot, but I'm using a canning rack inside of it. So you can totally, if you have a pot large enough, use a rack or make a rack and turn any pot into a canning rack. And today we're turning a Rondo into a brine pot. So this is technically a double batch. So we are going to add 12 cups of vinegar. I'm going to use as much of this white wine vinegar as we have. Okay, we have 12 cups of vinegar, and we're going to need 16 cups of water if I am correct. All right, and now we are going to add our remaining salt and sugar, which is a very minimal amount of sugar. The sugar in this is really only to balance. If you think about salt, the most flavorful things are things that are balanced all the way around. So not every pickle recipe calls for sugar. This one just calls for a little tiny bit. So it says canning salt. Me personally, I use whole mineral sea salt, and I use this. This is just my general thing. I don't use iodized or like diamond crystal kosher salt really for anything, because if I'm going to be eating salt, why not get our minimal minerals with it? But if you, there's nothing really special about canning salt except that it says that it will keep your brine super clear. I haven't really noticed a huge difference one way or the other, and I'd prefer to use a better salt. So we're going to do 1.5 cups because there is a total amount of salt in the recipe ingredients if you see, but then in the procedures for day 2, it says to add the remaining 3/4 of a cup, and we're doing a double batch, so we need 1.5 cups.
Oh, because you used it in the first day.
Yes.
Okay.
So the cool thing about the cucumbers is you're icing them and brining them, and that is going to enhance their ability to be crunchy, and it adds a lot of flavor to them as well. So when we pull out the cucumbers, we'll talk about that. But yeah, this is a recipe you really want to pay attention to. It's good to have your total list right here so that you know what to gather for this recipe, but it is super important to read the procedures because that's really where all the measurements are coming from. Okay, let's get into the rest of our ingredients here. Flowering dill is the best dill you can use for pickling because it's partially a seed, which has some excellent flavor, but it's also green, so it tastes like classic dill. So if it's in season, definitely go for flowering dill. And I'm gonna give each of you, it says like 10 and a half heads of dill for 7 jars. What that means, I don't know. This isn't gonna dictate the safety of this canning process, so we can put in as much or as little as we want. And I'm gonna give you guys what I think would be a good amount per jar. And what we wanna do, you could totally put them in whole, but I want you guys to get the absolute most in your jars. So when I hand these to you, just go ahead and cut the bottom stems off. Okay.
So just chop the head part off?
Just chop these little stem nubs down so that you have those kind of like separate, because they'll pack a lot easier into the jar. And all of the produce that we're using, the dill and the cucumbers are from Mama's Garden on Highway 9 in Deming or Acme, really. The garlic is from Twin Sisters Market. And I do recommend, okay, so another really important thing about canning is that all the produce and everything that you're using is extremely fresh, which is why canning season is a little bit of a hectic time because everything's coming in so fast, there's so much of it, and it all has to be processed pretty much right as it comes in if you really want the best end product. So, next thing, this is not on the recipe, but this is a secret for crunchy pickles, a grape leaf. There's tannins in this, so scientifically proven to keep your pickles more crunchy. So, we don't have to do any cutting or anything like that. We're just gonna kind of roll it in there and get it in there however we can.
So actually just a leaf from a grapevine.
Uh-huh. So, as the recipe says, you layer the cucumbers and ice that is allotted in there. And then you dissolve the amount of salt it tells you to dissolve, which is half a cup per 4 cups of water. So you're gonna dissolve, I like to do just like 1 or 2 cups of water in a little saucepan, bring it to a boil to dissolve the salt, and then you temper that by adding 2 cups of cold water. But then you'll always need more water to actually cover these, and it says that in there. And it says to use a plate or something to hold them down. I just use a Ziploc bag of water. It's clean and easy, and that's all. I use these for fermentation weights too. If I'm pickling something that I'm fermenting in a crock, I use a Ziploc bag full of water. Ceramic weights, honestly, I don't know why they don't. Glass fermentation weights are excellent, but ceramic ones will soak up the liquid and then they will mold. So anyways, I'm gonna drain these off, but these have sat for about 12 hours right now. So you let these sit in, and generally speaking, most of us don't have space to put a 12 quart in your fridge. You can use a cooler, that's totally fine. If it's not super hot out, especially if it's overnight, you can get away with doing this out of the fridge, but as long as it's somewhere cool, coolers are preferred. But yeah, now we're just gonna go ahead and drain these guys. And then we'll get to it. These cucumbers are from Mama's Garden, and they are perfect size for this pickle. Some of them are bigger, but we can kind of cherry pick a little bit today because we have a little bit more than we need. So very shortly here, we're gonna go ahead and grab our, well, I'm gonna get the brine on. The brine does not need to boil away. You do not want it to reduce because that will affect your dilution. And I'm going to turn up our lids just to make sure that they've come to a little bit of a simmer. All we're gonna do is bring it up so that it's hot and that the sugar and salt, water and vinegar have all melted together. It could come up to a boil, but you don't want it boiling away because if it's boiling away, the dilution is changing.
So it's not like a sterilization?
No.
It's just to get it.
Yep, it's just to get it to combine. Vinegar and salt are pretty sterile in themselves, so yeah, no need to worry there. And this is what I would call a happy bubble. It's not going crazy all over the place, but it's for sure boiling. I know for sure these are sterile. And I'll show you the first one real quick. Same thing, you want to always make sure that you're grabbing below that lip and not on the threads. And when you pour out a jar, you're gonna pour out through this big opening there and not through the small side because it will travel up the tines and burn you. So now that we are going to packing, I'm putting the lids back on our pots and I'm gonna turn the heat up just a little bit because you want your pots really ready to go. Once everything's ready, it's time to go. Brine is about to go, the lids look ready, so I'm gonna turn them down, the pots are ready to go. All right, let's get packing. So you're gonna put your jar funnel in, and now let's start with cucumbers. So I'm gonna kind of just put a little pile of cucumbers on everybody's board here, and you can start packing away. Let me get some of these big guys out of here. Smaller they are, the more you'll be able to fit. And you guys can start putting a little pile on your board there and then passing that down on that side. And then the grape leaf, you know, kind of try and roll up and stuff on the side with your cucumbers. If you can, however it fits. Really, honestly, there's no rhyme, like, it doesn't matter as long as things are in the jar and they're submerged and we are following the correct headspace. But yeah, you know, at some point you might want to start sprinkling in your garlic or fitting that in. You don't want to have your cucumbers completely packed before you start adding in your aromatics, but I think you will get more cucumbers in the jar if you add your aromatics kind of intermixed in the process here. And then I'll come around with the spices and measure them. And like I said, you totally can, if you like spicy cucumbers or spicy dill pickles, you could add chili flakes to this recipe. I would say probably like half a teaspoon to a teaspoon. Make sure you've got your grape leaf rolled up and stuffed in somewhere as well. You're gonna wanna pack to about the bottom ring of the jar, like just before the threads start is where you wanna pack the food to. And the headspace is going to be where we get the brine to. I'm not, you know, some people, they really just, they take their time to really pack jars ultra perfectly. Yeah, I don't personally have that time, especially not right this second, but you know, if you're at home and you're canning and you're enjoying it and you really want to pack things like in a beautiful pattern or something, like go ahead and do it. It's not necessary. But be forewarned, some people judge the merit of people's canning based on how beautifully they pack their jars, so. Okay, so does everybody have all of their garlic, all of their dill flour, all of their grape leaves? All right. We're looking good. So, like I said, the spices do not dictate the safety of a recipe. So, you know, you could put a tablespoon of peppercorns in there if you want, but it doesn't, you know, you won't really have that much space. I do a half teaspoon per jar. So I'm gonna go ahead and dole that out for everybody and all of these. Okay, 1 teaspoon of yellow mustard seed per jar, and that is in the recipe. So I'm gonna do a 1/4 teaspoon of dill seed in addition to the dill flour. And dill seed is in pickling spice, and so is mustard seed. And so is black pepper, but I don't know. I like to dictate exactly how much of what is going in my jars. I need to figure out how I'm going to transport brine to people's jars. You know what? I'm not gonna pick it up and pour it either. I'm just gonna dip it in there. All right, so I'm gonna come by with some brine and we are going to fill these to 1/2 inch headspace, if that's what the recipe says.
It does.
Okay. And always look, like when I'm at home, I've canned tomatoes my entire life with my grandmother and my family. And I've also canned tomatoes professionally for 11 years. And I've taught classes for 4 years. And guess what? I still open the book and look at the page every single time. So now we need to debubble. This is a debubbling tool. Any of these can be. And you're gonna wiggle this around the edge of your jar. And this is why, so I don't get it, okay. I don't spend a whole lot of time packing things perfectly because I know I'm gonna come through with a debubbler and I'm gonna mess it all up, so why would I do that? I don't know.
Eat it anyway.
I mean, I want it to look nice, and yes, I want as much to fit in there as possible, but, so you can go ahead and continue to poke around the side, and we will not measure the headspace until we've debubbled because that will displace and we'll need to redo it. And you can use the handle of that one as a debubbler too, just fine. Yep.
Oh, it smells so good.
And that's all I want it to smell like. I want it to smell like dill, garlic, maybe some peppercorn. I don't need the cinnamon or the allspice or any of that. Now, let's go ahead and readjust your headspace. So, this is a headspace measuring tool. It has these steps. It says 1 inch, 3/4, half, quarter. So depending on what your recipe says, you can measure it. We are doing a recipe that says 1/2 inch, which is about in the threads, yeah. So we're going to just fill it up a little bit more because you want the tip of this to just barely make contact with the brine, and that's when you know you've hit the headspace. Okay, so now everybody has a paper towel. You're going to fold it into a little kind of like serviette, and then I'll go take them and I'm gonna dip them in the hot water, and then we need to wipe the rim of our jar. You want to really make sure you're wiping the flat rim where the jar will make contact with the lid, and you want to make sure that the threads of the jar are wiped as well. And then be careful to not dip your wipe in the jar and make contact with. You want to do the best you can to wipe the top rim and the threads without making contact. Okay, so if everybody's wiped, let's go ahead and get our magic wands, which are the little magnetic sticks. When you grab your lid, make sure that you put it on and you do not touch the white or red gum side with your fingers. And you can either do that, or you can put your finger on top of it because that's not making contact with food. And there you go. And then this is very important. You do not want to over tighten jars. It can be very dangerous. It can create an explosion in your canning pot. So you want the jar, spin it until it stops spinning on its own, and then it's just like a quarter turn. Because what needs to happen is bubbles need to be able to come out, and the lid needs to pop open, but then come down without letting anything in. It needs to release gases and airs and whatever. So go ahead and try your, oh, that's hot. Go ahead and try your rim, and I will go around and...
You said just like spin until it stops spinning.
So yeah.
It's almost like finger tight, right?
So spin it until it stops spinning naturally, and then it's about a quarter turn.
Okay.
Okay, so let's dry off a little spot and just write, everyone's gonna write their initials on their lid so that you're taking home the pickles that you made in class. And then when the jars are in the pots, we can go ahead and write our notes as to what I do differently than the recipe as far as spicing goes. Okay, so now we are going to grab the tongs. So let's have you guys start on this side first and go ahead and put yours on the outer rim first. And you can fit 9 pints in a standard canner or 7 quart jars at a time. All right, so a stainless steel ruler is extremely important for home canning. It's not a tool that you will see in any book, but they ask you to measure things by an inch or two, so you'll need one. Anyways, it's incredibly crucial that your jars have at least 1 inch of water over top, not exceeding 2, because that changes the pressure enough that it will affect your canning. So we are just below 2, so this is perfect. We don't have to do anything. But if you were to put your jars in, Morgan, could you start a 15-minute time or a 10-minute timer? If you were to put your jars in and it's not, or let's say it's like really low, it's good to keep a pot of boiling water somewhere so that you can add boiling water to it immediately to bring it to the right temperature without doing any sort of differential that will shock your jars and potentially hurt you. So Morgan has tons of pens. If one of you guys wants to grab that box of pens and kind of hand it out to everybody, and I can tell y'all what I put in instead. There's a good section on the first page with the ingredient list. There's a good area that you can fit. But I want you guys to have the regular recipe. Like if you like pickling spice and you want to go exactly to a T what that recipe says, you can go ahead and do that. But, so let's get to that first page. Yeah, right here at the bottom, there's like a good spot to take notes, or right here. So I did I write 1 teaspoon of black pepper? Okay, okay. So 1 teaspoon of black pepper, 1 teaspoon of mustard, but that's listed, so sorry. Okay. 1/4 teaspoon of dill seed and 1 grape leaf. And this recipe can be a refrigerator pickle recipe. You can totally do every single thing the exact same and then just put them in the fridge instead of a canning pot if you like. And if you use a sterilized jar, they will be good in the fridge for basically as long as a canned pickle would be. Yes. Is that the 10-minute timer?
Yeah.
Okay, so now we're gonna turn this pot off and set a 5-minute timer. Without taking the lid off, they need to rest in the pot for 5 minutes, heat off, so that they can finish their little differential. Okay. We're getting very close here, folks. And once they come out, we're basically ready to go. We'll just take a couple minutes. We'll leave them on our cutting boards so that they can still kind of chill out for just a sec, and we'll kind of like wrap everything up and clean up. You want to try and not disturb them too much, but you can gently tip the water off the top, okay? Don't shake them around, don't jostle them too much. Okay, so you will want to put them on your cutting boards, not the cold metal. You did a good job. And this is the same at home. Do not take jars straight from a hot pot onto a cold counter. Either lay down a towel, put out one of those silicone resting racks, have a cutting board, use a wood board, whatever. But do not put it onto a cold marble or metal surface. Okay, well, I suppose we're gonna, I don't know, send you on your merry way with some paper towels.
Pop down or anything?
No, that's not gonna happen because, like I said, for USDA safe canning, you need to have taken them out of the pot and let them sit without being disturbed for 24 hours. So when you get home, you're gonna put this in the fridge. Unless you live really close to here and it's still really hot, I mean, I would let it come down to like just above room temperature or around room temperature before you put it in the fridge. But and then in about a week or two, you can open them up and try them. Never store jars in your cupboard with the rings on. After 24 hours, you want to take the ring off and you want to give the jar a good wipe or rinse it. Sometimes things seep a lot, and as long as it's sealed, the way you test for a seal is you've taken this ring off, and if you can lift the jar up by just the lid on its own, that's sealed. You don't store them with the rings for a couple reasons. It can provide a false seal, which means it didn't seal, but the ring is on, so you think it's sealed. And also, if there was seepage and stuff like that and the ring's on, you can't clean underneath that. So then there's like festering bits of food in there, and that's gross. And can cause contamination to the jar.
So seeping is normal?
Seeping
Like, 'cause I
can
made
happen.
apple pie filling and it seeped, but it's totally sealed.
Yeah, and
Okay.
so you just take the ring off and you rinse the jar, you wipe it down. You want to be careful to not catch it on the lid or anything, but yeah, seepage is normal, it happens.
Okay. Seepage, okay, as long as sealed.
As long as it's sealed.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay.
And even if sometimes jars will seep like an inch or two down.
Really?
Yeah, that can happen. And that's not preferred. There's a lot of ways to kind of troubleshoot that, but yes, as long as it's sealed, generally it's fine. Other than that, thanks so much for coming.
Thank you.
Yeah. And take your booklets home. Oh, sorry, I didn't even. Behind the recipe in this booklet, I have copied for you the section titled The Art and Science of Home Food Preservation. This has all of the safety things that you need to know, so many temperatures, everything about headspace, everything about how to pack a canner. Like, really, honestly, I think it's a great chapter to just read through like a book. And then there's a lot of troubleshooting things in here. A lot of the questions you asked me is in this section. And we talked about a lot of this stuff, but I wanted you to have it to take home. And then just in case, at the very end, you have the altitude chart. Yeah. Okay. I'm so glad I remembered to tell you that. Thanks so much, everybody. All right, that is the end of class. We got to make my favorite cucumber dill pickle recipe at the Skagit table using cucumbers from Mama's garden. And what a great class it was. Now I'm tired and I'm ready to go home. Like and subscribe.